Okay, let's keep going. Let's try to see if we can, because once we get through this, we get some other stuff and we can have better information to try to deal with things. So, again, I tell you, this quote is in a James speech in Acts 15. That doesn't mean the way it's interpreted in Acts 15, it has to do with bringing the Gentile community in, and it's interpreted in a pro-Pauline manner in favor of Paul. It's basically, Paul has come up to Jerusalem, and Peter and James are pictured as supporting him. But I don't accept that presentation personally. I think that that is not to be necessarily entertained. You have to read Paul's letters, and then you'll see that that's not what their understanding of the situation was, because later on, when Paul's in Antioch, the representatives from James come down, and the people who kept company with the, I'm not saying this is right or wrong, with the Gentiles, as it were, of Paul's teaching, withdrew from them, refused to keep company with them anymore. At that point, Paul gets furious and accuses Peter and Barnabas of being hypocrites. It's in Galatians 2. And he calls the some from James the party of the circumcision, meaning they're still insisting on the law of circumcision. And Peter has to follow James. Peter is not the head of the church. The Catholic Church says he is, but that's not what Galatians says. And we in academia, when we have what we call a primary source and a secondary source, Paul's letter would be considered a primary source, which is actually written by him, and we all think it's authentic. Acts is written later by someone else, sort of like maybe having one of Bush's speechwriters write something. And so the primary, if there's a contradiction, which there is, the primary source is to be preferred. Now, I do this in Christian Origins class, and I show all these problems. And it's all coming from the study of the scrolls. I learned all about early Christianity from the study of the scrolls. So, for instance, I'll give you an example of a contradiction between Galatians and Acts. Paul says in Galatians that he went up to Jerusalem after his vision, whatever. It doesn't say he went to Damascus after his vision. There's another commonality, the Damascus thing, with this document. It says he went away to Arabia for 2 years, and only after 2 years went back to Damascus. And then it says he went up to Jerusalem. And there he only met Peter and James, the brother of the Lord. And he was unknown, therefore he was unknown, no, of all the apostles, he said, he only met Peter and James, the brother of the Lord. So it's clear that Peter and James, the brother of the Lord, are apostles, but James, the brother of the Lord, isn't listed in the Gospels as an apostle, but Paul certainly considers him an apostle. And then he says, that's why I was unknown by sight among the churches in Christ in Judea, who only knew that their enemy, the man who formerly persecuted them, had now come over to their way of thinking. And then I left and was gone for 14 years and didn't return. Was unknown by sight among the churches of God in Judea. Well, Acts has Paul going up to Jerusalem, being welcomed by all the apostles, teaching fearlessly on the streets of Jerusalem with the apostles, and then the Jews wanting to kill Paul. Well, this is a totally, what would you call it, skewed literature. This doesn't agree with Paul's testimony at all. It says he was unknown by sight, didn't teach on the streets of Jerusalem, only met 2 apostles. You know, if I put this up in the Peterson trial up in Northern California, I mean, they'd laugh me out of the court. You know. That's the problem with evidence. No, we don't have any courts that are evaluating this evidence. So, as a rule of thumb, in a contradiction between Paul and Acts, the primary document is to be preferred. Give you another example. Paul says that he escaped down the walls of Damascus in a basket in 2 Corinthians. to escape the representatives of Aretas who wanted to arrest him. Aretas being the Arab king who had taken action against Herod the Tetrarch because of the divorce of his daughter that John had also protested against and was killed in the context according to the Gospels. The book of Acts says Paul escaped down the walls of Damascus in a basket to escape the Jews who wanted to kill him. So that's a slight shift. That's not what Paul says in 2 Corinthians. You say, oh, he escaped twice down the walls of Damascus in a basket. Well, I won't go that far. We're having the same episode, but it's being presented differently by a different writer. You follow what I'm trying to say? So in 2 Corinthians, it takes precedence over what he says. And he says right after that, and I do not lie. I promise you what I say is I do not lie. And he also says that in Galatians. In case you don't believe me, I will just read you quickly those couple of passages. Because a lot of people never read this stuff. And therefore they don't believe people who point it out. Acts I don't have to bother reading. But here he says in Galatians is a crazy letter, and everybody, when I read Galatians, my mind was open. But when it pleased God, who separated me from my mother's womb and called me by his grace to reveal his Son in me, that I might preach the gospel about him to the nations. I didn't discuss this, doesn't say it was a vision on the way to Damascus or anything like that. Immediately, with any flesh or blood, I didn't talk to any physical being, Peter, James, anyone else. Nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia. I didn't go to Damascus. And returned again to Damascus 3 years later. After which I went up to Jerusalem and made friends with Peter. And I remained with him 15 days. But I did not see any of the other apostles except James, the brother of the Lord. Now when I write to you, behold, by God I do not lie. Then I came into the regions of Syria and Cilicia, but I was not known by face to the churches of Judea which were in Christ. Only they had heard that he who had persecuted them in times past was now preaching the gospel that he had previously wished to destroy, and they were glorifying God in me, so he says. Then 14 years later, I went up to Jerusalem again, taking Barnabas and Titus with me. And now he starts getting upset about circumcision. For fear of the course I had been running, or was running, would be in vain. And he shows that circumcision he's worried about, because he said, but even Titus, who was with me, being a Greek, was forced to be circumcised. And this on account of false brothers who stole in secretly to spy out the freedom which we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might enslave us. Well, if you know what enslaved is and false brothers, it means that they came in when they were naked and looked to see if they were circumcised. And that the freedom he enjoys is Christ Jesus is freedom from the law. We'll find out in the rest of this book. Well, we can agree or not agree. It doesn't make any difference. I don't care if someone's circumcised or not circumcised. Circumcision is just the mark of the covenant for Jews, that's all. So if you want the promises of the covenant for zealot-minded ones, they'd say you should have first come into the covenant. But that's just arguments then. Not speaking about now. To whom we did not give in, not even for an hour, so the truth of the gospel might continue, the gospel as he teaches it. But on the contrary, seeing that I have been charged with the gospel to the uncircumcised, even as Peter to the circumcised. For he who worked in Peter the apostleship to the circumcised, also worked in me the apostleship to the Gentiles. So Peter's supposed to only go to Jews while he goes to non-Jews. And when they saw the grace which was given to me, James, now Cephas, and John, it doesn't say Peter this time, he says Cephas, whoever that is. Normally we think that's Peter. These esteemed pillars gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and I, that we should go to the Gentiles and that they should go to the circumcision. Meaning, we only went to the non-circumcised, non-people who would come into the Torah of Moses, and they went only to the Torah of Moses people. Only asking that we should be sure to remember the poor, of course, the Ebianim, which I was anxious to do. However, and this shows that the understanding was not clear to everybody, as he puts it. When Peter came to Antioch, now I don't know if this is Cephas or Peter, but here it's Peter now. I set my face against him. Cephas is Peter in Aramaic, rock. I set my face against him because he was most surely in the wrong. For before the representatives of James came down, he was in the habit of eating with Gentiles. But when they came, he was afraid of the party of the circumcision, or insisting on circumcision, and drew back and separated himself from them. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him. So even Barnabas was carried away by their hypocrisy. But when I saw they did not walk uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, as I was teaching, and I said to Peter in the presence of all, etc., 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 etc. Then he goes on to argue against the law and circumcision in the rest of this letter. But you see, the point is that all is not peaceful. Paul calls Peter and Barnabas hypocrites. James is the leader. Peter has to do what James commands, and none of this is presented in Acts. So that's why we have some real problems in early Christian history that the average believer is unaware of. Because the average believer just gets doctrine as it's presented in a catechism or something like that, but doesn't look at the actual documents themselves. And if he does, he just fobs over any difficulties. But when we're studying the scrolls and trying to figure out who these groups are, it's important to know what the difficulties are. You follow me? So that's why I've looked into these things. So there's a case in point. Paul thinks, now Acts here, I'll just read you this Jerusalem Council. There was an uproar because some people came down to his community from Judea and were taught, the brothers, these are people in the movement, not outside, unless you're circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. This is what the problem is in Galatians 2. So they agreed to send Paul and Barnabas up to Jerusalem. I won't read the whole thing to you. And there were certain of these who rose up at the meeting in Jerusalem and said, you have to circumcise and make them keep the law of Moses. Then Peter spoke. Peter supposedly had already fled the country with a death sentence because he had escaped from prison, and the guards were executed because they let him escape. So it's hard to understand why he's here, but in any case, he speaks about there being no differences between peoples, which is a noble thought, but I'm not sure that's what they thought in those days. And then James speaks, and after that, James, who's never been introduced, and we never know who he is in Acts, they never tell us who he is, answered and says, men, brothers, listen, Simon is told how God first looked out in order to take out the Gentiles and people for his name. And the words of the prophets agree with this, as it is written, after these things I will return and build again the tabernacle of David which is fallen, and I will build the ruins of it up again and set it up. This is right out of the Damascus Document that I'm reading. Now, as it's perturbed, so the men who are left may seek out the Lord, and all the Gentiles on whom my name has been called, saith the Lord, is doing these things. All the works are known to God from eternity. Therefore I judge. He doesn't even interpret it. He just gives you the Amos passage that we're going to get here in the Damascus Document. And then he says, I judge. We should not trouble the Gentiles turning to God, but to write to them in the following manner. Keep away from, there it is, pollution of the idols. In another version, it's keep away from things sacrificed to idols. Fornication, strangle things, and blood. And then later it says, keep away from things sacrificed to idols, blood, strangle things, which is carrying, and fornication. Well, you see, though, a lot of those subjects are in the Damascus Document. That doesn't prove anything. I'm just saying these are the parallels. It certainly gives you a chronological parallel, even if it doesn't give you something that you think is proof positive of anything. So anyways, I can't do the whole New Testament with you. That's another course. But all these things are there. And let's go back to the Damascus Document, because here we're going to find the same passage here in the Damascus Document. It's talking about escaping to the land of the north and building up my tent in Damascus. And I will establish the tent of David, which is fallen. Now, the king from the previous passage from Amos 5 is the community. Well, if you know the Pauline letters, Paul always talks about Jesus as being the community, and the members of the community being the members of Jesus' body. That's in 1 Corinthians. If you're a Christian, you would know that. Then, so that's a parallel. It's just said slightly differently. And let's see, the basis of the statutes from the previous Amos matter, it's all very esoteric. They are the books of the prophets, whose words Israel rejected or didn't follow. And now a new thing, the star. He is the interpreter of the law who came to Damascus. Ah, we have someone coming to Damascus, just like in the book of Acts. But what's the star? We haven't heard. Ah, because we're going to quote the star prophecy. As it is written, a star shall go forth from Jacob, a scepter to rule the world. Numbers 24:17. The star prophecy that Josephus says was the moving force behind the war against Rome. But these people are not applying the star prophecy to Vespasian, are they? The star that would rise from Jacob, a scepter to rule the world. No, they're applying it to one of their own. So the scepter is the prince of the congregation, and he, with his standing up, he will utterly destroy the sons of Seth. Obviously, that's esotericism having to do with, again, these foreign peoples. So, very warlike. Certainly not Vespasian, the way Josephus and Rabbi Yochanan use this. We'll hit this again in the War Scroll and in another Messianic Proof text document called the Florilegium by John Allegro, meaning a basket of flowers. But they were, really, it's the Florilegium of promises to David. We're almost done with this document, so let's hurry through it, shall we? We're in column 8. Here the two come together again for a while, and then the manuscript A leaves off, and we only have manuscript B, which is called column 20 in manuscript B. But it's really continues on from column 8 in manuscript A. A little difficult to understand, but I have it put together for you in my book, and the others, of course, have their way of putting it. So both say the avenging sword of the covenant. The rest will be given over to the avenging sword of the covenant. It says, manuscript B, manuscript A, these escaped in the era of the first visitation, while the backsliders were given over to the sword. And this also will be the judgment of all those who, I'm going to read this fast now, all those who went to this covenant who did not hold fast, again, not keeping the covenant, holding fast to the laws and statutes, that's the big crime. Their visitation will be destruction by the hand of Belial. So these people are going to be destroyed, all the backsliders. I have to say that if this is in the first century, all the Paul type people, all the Rabbi Yochanan type people, not just, you know, Gentile backsliders, but Jewish backsliders. This is the day which God commands, or in which God visits, if you prefer. That is, this is the day of judgment day. The princes of Judah are those who remove the bond, upon whom wrath will be poured out. Hosea 5:10. Now, to my mind, the princes of Judah are the Herodians at this point. Read Judea. Read rulers. They are diseased without a cure. And he will exterminate them. Peaceful? I don't think so. Love your neighbor? Love your enemy? No. Not in this doctrine. Not in any Dead Sea Scroll. Pacifist Essenes? I don't think so. All of them are rebels. Manuscript B adds, since they came to the covenant of repentance, but have not turned aside from the way of traitors. They came to repent, John the Baptist called for repentance, but they didn't really do it. They didn't turn aside from the way of traitors. Traitors is a big thing in the New Testament. In other words, they still kept touch with the establishment. Rather, they immersed themselves or wallowed in the ways of fornication and evil riches. Establishment, Maccabean or Herodian? You decide. They have been vengeful and borne malice against his brother, each man hating his brother. That is not loving your brother as you should, but hating your brother. Maccabean or Herodian? And each man sinned against the flesh of his own flesh. There it is again. That is, he came again and fornicated with near relatives. Each man again, so the accusation is repeated. I don't see how anyone can think this is anything but Romans and Herodians that are being attacked here. Where they got Maccabees? It has to be prejudice. Jewish prejudice, because the rabbis don't like the Maccabees. They blame the Maccabees for the war against Rome, and the ethos is too powerful for them. And the Christian literature is not terribly excited about the Maccabees, even though it's part of the Christian Bible. At least the Catholic Bible has the Maccabees. But it seems to be a prejudice against the Maccabees to think that's who we're talking about here. Most people thought the Maccabees were honorable nationalists, I think. They sinned against flesh of their flesh, approaching them for fornication. They used their power for riches and profiteering. Line 7 is profiteering. Each man doing what's right in his own heart, each choosing stubbornness of his heart, for they did not keep apart from the people. Possibly meaning peoples, a word for, general foreigners. But that is, again, Nazar, keeping away from, NZR, keep away from, like in the James materials. And they knowingly sin, walking the way of evil ones, about whom God said, their wine is the venom of vipers. Here we go with that viper stuff again. And the cruel poison of asps. Deuteronomy 32. Now, wine is yain in Hebrew, and yain can also be yavan, meaning Greece, probably because wine originally came from Greece. It's the same root in Hebrew, so they're playing on roots here. That's where they get the head of the kings of Greece. And venom is also the same name word in Hebrew as rosh, as head. So venom can be poison, rosh, or rosh, head. So they're fooling around with the words and the wordplay in these languages. They like wordplay. So they're going to interpret this Deuteronomy passage. And their venom, their wine, is the venom of vipers and the cruel poison of asps. Deuteronomy 32:33. The vipers in this passage are the kings of the peoples. Well, kings of the peoples is a word we know from Roman jurisprudence. All the kings in the east were called the kings of the gentium, the kings of the people, the kings of the ethnon in Greek, the peoples. Petty kings in the east and all these little kingdoms. The Roman emperor ruled up till Greece, but after Greece there were little kings in all these areas of Asia Minor, Armenia, Syria, and so on. Those were the kings of the peoples. The Herodians were called kings of the peoples in Roman jurisprudence. Now my thing, I think that's a direct reference to the Herodians. You say, well then what do you make of the head of the kings of Greece? Well, these people weren't so professional that they understood. If a person spoke Greek, like Syria is Greece. These kings like the Herodians and in the Asia Minor, they all spoke Greek, so they're Greek-speaking kings. The head of the Greek-speaking kings is the Roman emperor. Now you can say, oh, he's the Seleucid. No, there's no petty kings under the Seleucids. So even though this is odd language, I still think that the meaning is clear. They're playing on words. The head of the kings of Greece because of the wine, and they like the wine and the idea of Greece. I explain all that. Rosh, poison, also being a homonym for Rosh, head, who comes to execute vengeance upon them. When in the Jewish war, we get the Roman emperor coming to execute vengeance on all these people. Back to the builders of the wall, we heard already in 4 and 6, and the daubers with plastin, the prophets who, with their lying spirit, who crying peace when there is no peace, according to Ezekiel. They have not understood because they followed somebody of a confused spirit or windiness, a windbag or something. Someone in the manuscript B says, walking in the wind. And the spouter of lying spouted to them. Now that shows that all these documents are written around the same time, because we're going to hear about the spouter of lying in about 4 other documents. So if you want to put this in the 2nd century BC and the Habakkuk thing in the 1st century AD and separate them by 3 centuries, how come you have the same characters? The spouter of lying is going to be a principal character in the Habakkuk commentary and in the Psalm 37 commentary and in the Nahum commentary. This kindled God's wrath in his whole congregation. Nor did they understand what Moses said, not for your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart are you going to possess these nations. Here's a kind of grace that we get in Pauline thought. You know, I'm not doing this for you. It's something that you did that I'm going to do it for you. It's by the grace of God. Because of his love for your fathers and keeping the oath. That's the grace of God. It's not called grace. They don't have a word grace in here. But here's a kind of grace here. It's because God loved the first, the forefathers. We've had that from the beginning. What do the Gospels say? The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. Don't you think that's playing off this? Oh, I think it is. But if we didn't have this literature, we wouldn't know it. We would just have a cute little expression that we all like, because we like to, everyone hates the big shots and wants them to be put last, and everyone, because we're all last, we want to be put first. So that appeals to us, but in this context it means something quite different. It's Jesus being presented with a different point of view than these people. Did Jesus say that? Well, it depends if you think people had a tape recorder around and understood in places like Rome and Greece what Jesus in Palestine had been saying, which I very much doubt. But you'll have to decide that for yourself. It takes a lot more study than we can do in this one course to decide that question. All I want to say is the same vocabulary is being used, except this is an opposite point of view as usual. Because he loved the first, who testified on his behalf, the forefathers. He loved those coming after them, because theirs is the covenant of the fathers, the first covenant, the Mosaic covenant, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, like in the beginning of this document. And because of his hatred for the builders of the wall, we heard about those people earlier, his anger was kindled against them and against all those walking after the manuscript B adds. And this is the kind of judgment that will be upon all those who reject the commandments of God and forsake them. All the people who reject God's commandments and forsake them. We have a bunch of those people in the New Testament period. Turning away in stubbornness of heart, and a bunch of people like that. And then this is the word Jeremiah spoke to Baruch the son of Neriah and Elisha to Gehazi his servant. In the Talmud, the rebuke of Elisha to Gehazi is usually a code for the rebuke, I guess, of Jesus to Paul. That code is used in the Talmud. It's a very obscure code, but here they have it here. Now, it may not mean the same thing. I'm just saying that's in the Talmud used like that. Forget all that. here we're new gear, finishing up. All the men went to the new covenant in the land of Damascus, Manuscript B adds, but turned back and betrayed and turned aside from the fountain of living waters. So the new covenant land of the Damascus was like the diggers of the well, like a fountain of living waters where you rejuvenated yourself in the water of a daily baptism kind of thing. This is definitely a daily baptism sort of new covenant. This is 1st century. There's nothing like this in the 2nd century BC. That's all I can say repeatedly. Damascus, Paul goes to Damascus, but presented differently. But and turned aside from the fountain of living waters will not be reckoned in the foundation, and shall not be inscribed on the day of the gathering, and then the rest of this is all from Manuscript B. Manuscript A ends there. Of the teacher of the community, until the standing up again, perhaps arising, resurrecting, or coming, depending how you want to interpret standing up, of the Messiah from Aaron and from Israel. Again, the verb is singular. It doesn't say the Messiahs of Aaron and Israel. The Hebrew is singular. Now, some people want to say 2 Messiahs, maybe, but it just says Messiah from Aaron and Israel. It doesn't say the Messiah of Aaron and the Messiah from Israel. If it said that, we could say there's 2 Messiahs. It may be, but the verbs are all singular. And I think we're going to get ample evidence here that they have the notion of the single Davidic Messiah just like Christianity does. People have used this to say, oh, this is not Christian because it's not a Christian type Messiah. But the Christian type Messiah, even in the Luke, has a Aaron mother, priest mother, related to John the Baptist, who's called priestly, and a Davidic father, even though God is the father. So, Israel and Aaron, if you want to be strict about that, even in the Gospel of Luke. Matthew's the only other one that actually gives the birth of the Messiah. So the other 2 Gospels, John and Mark, don't deal with it. And now this is pretty harsh. And this is the judgment. We're going to hear that there's a person called the Mibaker, sort of overseer or bishop does judgments on people. And I think we're talking about a bishop-type person. We're going to hear about him later on in other documents. But he does judgments on people, when they misbehave or aren't doing infractions. He puts penalties on them and stuff. On any member of the assembly, or church if you like, of the men of perfect holiness. So what's the name of this group? Another name is the Assembly of the Men of Perfect Holiness. And what's a perfect holiness person? That's a Nazarite, a lifelong Nazarite, who doesn't do, and here's the emphasis on doing, you see, the commands of the straight or the upright. This man will be melted in a furnace, like Ezekiel 22 says. But according to the appearance of his works, for evil this is, he shall be expelled from the assembly or the church or the congregation, like someone whose lot had never fallen among the disciples of God. That's another name for this community. So this has several names. The Assembly of Perfection of Holiness, marking this, or the Disciples of God, so there's expulsion here, banishing, shunning like in Galatians when the others shunned Paul, or the Essenes who cast out backsliders according to Josephus. According to his rebelliousness, the men of knowledge, 1 Corinthians 8, Paul heaps abuse on the men of knowledge. He says knowledge puffs up, love builds up, and then goes on to say things sacrificed to idols are not important, and eating them doesn't matter, because an idol is nothing in this world. That's all in 1 Corinthians, where he heaps abuse on James' ruling to abstain from things sacrificed to idols. Here we have the men of knowledge shall punish him. These people believe in the opposite of what he believes, until the day he returns to stand in the presence of the men of perfect holiness. So the group is the men of perfect holiness. And his works are revealed according to the exact letter of the interpretation of the Torah in which the men of perfect holiness walk. He has to walk exactly like they walk, in the Torah. Paul, says James even in Acts, we hear that you do not regularly keep the law. Go into the temple and show that you do. Pay for the Nazarite oath before people. And we know he doesn't, but he's willing to do that because he doesn't believe it's important to be sincere. He says in Corinthians, I got read to you, 1:8, I'm a Greek to the Greek, a Jew to the Jew, a lawkeeper to the lawkeeper, a lawbreaker to the lawbreaker. I will do whatever I have to do to win. That's how I fight. All the athletes in the stadiums are fighting for a prize. I fight for one that never withers. That's how I fight, not beating the air, using stadium athletics, which would, as you can imagine, horrify the people of Palestine. Greek stadium athletics, where people went around naked, oil their bodies and stuff like that. So he says he'll do anything. He's the first modern man. He'll say or do anything he has to do to win, and he did. He won. These people are losers, as you can see. They're not going to win. Paul's the first modern man, and he has exactly the opposite view that they have. Certainly not according to the exact interpretation of the Torah, which the men of perfect holiness. But here you see they do shun or expel people who do not behave like this. Nor should anyone cooperate with him in purse and works. In Acts, Paul falls out with Barnabas and John Mark, who refuse to travel with him anymore. And he has to get some new traveling companions. He says in Acts 16, I will not travel with John Mark, who deserted our work in Pamphylia, as he says. And then Barnabas and John Mark sail off, according to Acts 16. This is a different kind of work, not works, but service or mission. For all the holiness of the Most High have cursed him. Paul says in Galatians, look, you say that I try to please men. I'll show you how I try to please men, making the gospel too easy, that is. Let anyone who teaches a different gospel than my own, let him be accursed. Let me say it again. Anyone who teaches a different gospel than my own, let him be accursed. So he's cursing people who are different from him. And what are these people doing? They're cursing people different from them. But again, it's a parallel. And this is the judgment too upon all those who reject the Torah among the first and the last. Here are first who have put idols on their heart. Stay away from idols. And walked in stubbornness of heart. They shall have no share in the house of the Torah. This is what the group is called the house of the Torah too. They shall be judged according to the judgment of their companions who turned aside with the man of scoffing. We heard about that man of scoffing early in the text, who poured the waters of lying over Israel. But now it's the men of scoffing, plural. The jesting or comedians, if you like, because they spoke mistakenly about the laws of righteousness, the Mosaic law, rejected the covenant and the promise of the covenant which they raised in the land of Damascus. Again, the covenant in the land of Damascus. This is the new covenant. The new covenant they raised in the land of Damascus. Now I'm going to tell you a secret. I don't usually tell this because I haven't published it totally. And I don't like people to know ideas that I haven't. It's in my James book, but it's buried. It's going to become the principal part of the new book. Damascus in Hebrew is two fragments. Dam, which in Hebrew is blood, and kus in Hebrew is cup. Cup of blood. This is the new covenant. This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, says the Gospels. That's just an esoteric understanding of Damascus in Hebrew. So the new covenant in the land of Damascus is just a variation on the cup of the new covenant in my blood. I don't like to tell people this. I haven't told you, probably did. But I have no choice because it is the most killer thing that I've ever developed. And even further, Jesus says, drink this. In Hebrew, Damascus is Damashek. Damashek, Dam, blood, Mashek, drink. So actually, they're having, you couldn't have that kind of correspondence. To have a correspondence like that, it would be like 1 in 10 billion. So we have two new covenants, one in the cup of the new covenant in my blood, that Jesus says to drink this. The other, the one in the land of Damascus actually translating out as cup of blood and drink. That to me is like impossible coincidence. You follow me? Totally. So these people are operating in the same ballpark. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not saying that maybe at Qumran they had a more esoteric meaning of these things. But these people are in the same ballpark. It's really wild when you think of it.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite following. So
I'm not saying anything conclusive about it.
Actually, going back before your and the new covenant.
Well, you have to know the Gospels.
Right. Well,
do you know the Gospels?
Somewhat, but I'm not actually talking about the cup of blood.
Oh.
Their use of the new covenant, I haven't quite been able to follow. Is that distinguished from the covenant with the fathers, or is it?
I don't know.
In this document?
I don't know. We're going to have to see what you think. I mean, I'm just keep saying it over and over again in order for you to decide for yourself that point. If you're confused, you're just going to have to keep thinking about if you think it's distinguished or the same. Got it? So, I mean, I don't want to lay the law down here. It's a good question. You have a right to be confused. So I'm just hurrying to get through it. You forgive me. But yes, but it looks pretty much the same. Now maybe there's some secret things underlying it that they had for really close initiates that we're not getting here, you know. You follow me? So that could be different if you get right down to it. See what I mean? So you have a right to ask that. But this document isn't going to tell us that. So far it says the exact letter of the Torah in which the men of perfect holiness walk. They shall have no share in the house of the Torah. This group calling itself the house of the Torah. So that's all I can tell you. Looks like the same. Rededication to even more extreme form. The men of scoffing spoke mistakenly about the laws of righteousness, rejected the covenant that they raised in the land of Damascus, the new covenant. Neither they nor their families shall have a share in the house of the Torah again, repeated a second time, until the gathering of the guide, again Yoreh here, of the community, until the end of the men of war walked with the man of lying, approximately 40 years. So the man of lying is now also mentioned here. He'll be in all the other documents. The men of war, some people that were his buddies. And in that era, the wrath of God will be kindled against Israel. As we said, there's no king, no prince, no judge, none to rebuke with righteousness, Hosea. But the penitents from sin in Jacob, here the penitents again, kept the covenant of God. They were keepers. Again, be a keeper, not a breaker, as James says. Then each man shall speak to his neighbor, strengthening his brother to support their steps in the way of God. And God hearkened to their words and heard. And a book of remembrance was written out before him for God-fearers. Now, Jesus says, do this in remembrance of me. Here's the book of remembrance for God-fearers. God-fearers are Gentiles. That's the word for people associated with the Jewish synagogues and so on who fear God. So this, to my mind, there are two groups, and the Nilvim, as we said earlier, the penitents and the Nilvim. Here it's the penitents again, you see, and the God-fearers. And they will have a book of remembrance. So there's a double group in this community, Gentiles and Jews, but law-keeping Gentiles. That's my view of this.
So are you saying that that's like corresponding kind of with the whole, like what the Bible then says is going to break out of sharing the gospel with Gentiles? And then
what the New Testament says goes far beyond anything said here, so I really can't exactly equate that. Only that these people are interested in Gentiles, but not in the way the New Testament portrays it, because to my mind the New Testament is Paulinist. And you'd have to do a Christian origins class to see that, or a historical Jesus class for that. But we know the James group didn't see it like that. And James is the leader of the early church, so this was a mistake. Anyway, James looks like this group, so I call this group Jamesian Christians. And the other group, Pauline Christians. But we're all Pauline Christians. We don't know that, but that's what we are. That's why we honor the letters of Paul. These people would take the letters of Paul and burn them. But we have these groups in early Christianity who feel this way about Paul. He's the enemy in the Ebionite literature. He's called the enemy of God. In the book called the Clementine Recognitions. It's tough to go anyway. And listen to this. And for those considering his name, remember in that Acts passage, called by his name, now it's considering or reckoning his name. When we're talking about the house of David in that Acts 15 passage, the tent of David. And until God shall reveal salvation, in Hebrew, Yeshua, Yesha, Jesus. But Jesus as not as a man as such, but as a theoretical concept. The name Jesus means salvation, and you may know that. So I think what people have done in the Gospels is personified some of this in their own way. Paulinized and personified some of this material. That doesn't mean they're wrong and this is right. All we're trying to do is figure out the scrolls now. This is the native Palestinian literature. I believe. I don't think you'll find a gospel in Palestine. They're all written in Greek, overseas. And justification of those fearing his name. Again, God fears again. Then they shall return and see the difference between the righteous and the wicked, and the servant of God and those who do not serve him. Paul heaps abuse on the servants of God who disguise themselves as servants of the devil in 2 Corinthians 11:15. The pseudo-apostles, those who consider themselves servants of righteousness, but they're really servants of the devil. They're really sons of darkness, even though they consider themselves sons of light. He's very, very, very tough and sometimes very nasty about such things. So are these people. Anyway, repeating that previous one, he does mercy and justice or love to the thousands of them that love him. Again, as James puts it in 2:5, the kingdom promised to those that love him and the poor in James 2:5. And to his keepers for 1,000 generations. I don't know what the house of Peleg is except the house of separation. Those people who were the house of Peleg, again probably the backsliders, probably what that means, who went out from his place of holiness, all this is code, and relied on God during the era of Israel's rebellion and pollution of the temple, but turned aside from God among the people. Here too, again, possibly people. In things that have little importance, they shall be judged, each man according to his spirit. With the appearance of the glory of God, God is coming in all his glory. Among the members of the covenant who transgress the boundary of the Torah, they shall be cut off in the midst of the camp. Paul says, tell them who are troubling you, I wish they would themselves cut off. This group says, the backslider shall be cut off in the midst of the camp. Paul's talking about the circumcised who he wishes in Galatians they'd cut their own sex parts off. If you don't believe me, it's in Galatians 5 and 6. With the evil ones of Judah in the days of trial, however, all those hold fast to these statutes and come going in accordance with the Torah, and listen to the voice of the teacher, and confess before God, we have sinned, we have been wicked. Here's the penance. We and our fathers, because we walk contrary to the laws of the covenant. Is this the same as the old covenant, you asked? You have to decide that question on the basis of the evidence here. I can't give you a final judgment. You have to make that determination. Looks it. But there may be some secret information that we're missing. But your judgments upon us are truth, nor will we lift up our hand against the holiness of his laws, and the righteousness of his judgments, and testimonies of his truth. Sort of like the beginning. Rather, we have been instructed in the statutes of the first, in which the men of the community were judged. See, this is a total whole. And they shall listen to the voice of the teacher of righteousness, and not desert the laws of righteousness. But rather, when they hear them, they shall exult and rejoice, and their hearts will be strengthened, and they shall prevail or be victorious against all the sons of the earth. This is also a pep talk. The final apocalyptic war against all evil we're going to hear about in the war scroll. And God will make atonement for or through them, and they will see his salvation again, Yeshua, because they took refuge in his holy name. That's why I read this whole document. It's a killer document. But the only way you can know it's a killer document is to have someone read it out loud to you. You follow what I'm trying to say? There are lots of people who never hear this because they read it. And you can't get this if you read it. That's why I bore you with reading it out loud. You can only get it if someone reads it out loud. Listen to the end of that thing. That is really the end. There's some legalistic stuff that comes afterwards that may be attached to it from some other materials. That's the end of the material about that last sentence. They shall be victorious over all the sons of the earth, and God will make atonement for or through them, and they will see his salvation, his Yeshua, because they took refuge in his holy name. And they will see Jesus, if you want to be in Orange County pulpit here, because they took refuge in his holy name, God's or Yeshua? I don't know. But the question is it a man or a concept, you see? This is wild stuff. You guys want to knock off an evaluation here before you go, or you want to do it another time? All right, we'll wait till another time then. Let's do some more work then. I got 15 more minutes, huh? Huh? Okay. All right. So I'll do it when we have more people. But they've given out the things. I thought we'd get it taken care of because it's a pain in the neck to interrupt things. Let's look at some of the materials. I don't know if I brought I didn't translate the rest of the stuff in the Damascus document because it's mostly legal stuff, minutia legal stuff. Where he's speaking in chapter 15 or Roman numeral 15 about the guardian, that's the overseer, the mibakar. He has to, people have to come back and stand before the overseer, the mibakar. It's like a bishop, really. In Christianity, he would be a bishop. That's how they work in the camps here. Then he's got line Roman numeral 9 because they say the Damascus document is out of place. But that's an interesting one. Anyone in Roman numeral 9.
Okay.
In Vermesh, it's 137. Who vows another to destruction by the laws of the Gentiles shall himself be put to death. So you are not to go into the Gentile courts. You are not to send anyone to be tried by the Gentile courts. And if you do, you suffer the death penalty. There's the whole thing about the trial of Jesus right there. This group would not agree with any death penalty pronounced by a Roman type of court and would not allow any person to be condemned to death or any testimony against a person to be in such a court. It's an innocuous sentence but it's quite clear what they think about that. So, anyone who vows another to destruction by the laws of the Gentiles shall himself be put to death. You rebuke your person who takes anger, and you shouldn't bear rancor against enemies. There is, in a way, you love your enemy a little bit there. You have to rebuke people who are doing things that are wrong, but you should not bear this anger. Let's see. These are all minuscule legal things. Observe the Sabbath, for instance, in number 10. Don't do business. Don't eat anything lying in the fields. Jesus says glean on the Sabbath. And they say don't do that. According to the New Testament, Jesus says that. Let's see. A lot of minutiae here. But it's a different spirit than the rest of the document. That's why I didn't bother with it. It didn't seem to me to be terribly important. There is some material about circumcising here. No man should defile himself by eating live creatures or creeping things, from the larvae of bees to all creatures which creep in the water. They shall eat no fish unless split alive, and their blood poured out. And as for locusts, according to the various kinds, I shall plunge them alive into fire or water. For this is what the nature requires in order to make them pure. So John ate locusts, supposedly. That's okay with this group as long as he boiled them in the right way. It's not as if he was doing anything wrong, although people question whether that is proper. Those who follow the statutes of the age of wickedness until the arising, again, not coming, the end of that, of the Messiah, of Aaron and Israel. So arising can be return, resurrection, or coming. It depends on how you see it. Has he already come? Or is he gone? Or is he going to come? That's repeated several other times. For instance, in that 13, this is the rule for the assembly of the camps during all the age of wickedness. And whoever doesn't hold fast to these statutes shall not be fit to dwell in the land until the Messiah of Israel shall arise at the end of days. And we have something about the, I have it in another one at the end of this too. It says, until the arising of the Messiah of Aaron and Israel. It also says at one point, because they follow these things, because the holy angels are in their camps. I don't know where that exactly is in this, because I have mine marked in a different book, but we have the holy angels. And also at one point, when it gives the qualifications of this guardian, or mibaker, guardian is the wrong word, it's really an overseer or bishop. He is supposed to know all the languages of the earth. In other words, language in Hebrew is tongues. So he's supposed to speak in tongues, if you want to call it that. He's supposed to master all the languages of the earth, at one point it says. So you have a speaking in tongues, but not the way it's interpreted in the scripture that we know. So you have a lot of interesting parallels here. Do you see that one where he's supposed to know all the languages? Can you find me that one? Where we're giving the qualifications of this weird person who's heading the. This is the laws. They have these camps out in the wherever they are in the land of Damascus. I think the land of Damascus goes all the way up to northern Syria, in my view. But let me see if we can just find that one thing here. Let's see. Do you see it? Anyone see it? Oh, here it is. It's in 13. And the priest who is appointed to head the congregation shall be from 30 to 60, learned in the book of meditation, whatever that is, and all the judgment and laws, so as to pronounce them correctly. The mibaker, the bishop or the overseer of all the camps, shall be from 30 to 50. One who has mastered all the secrets of men and the languages of all their nations, or the languages of all mankind. Clans is the wrong translation. So he shall, but language in Hebrew is tongues. So he's mastered all the secrets and all the tongues of mankind. He can speak in tongues. I thought that's a really good definition of it. One last thing, so you get this off right. Let's just quick one look at the community rule before we go, since we're not going to take time out to do the other thing. I want to keep moving in these areas that we want to deal with here. The community rule is the next document I want you to look at. And this talks about the guide in column 1. This is another person. It's the maskil, basically. It's a slightly different title of someone. But if you look quickly here at the beginning, he will teach all the holy ones of the community, first column of the community rule, to seek God with a complete heart, to do and doing, do, what is good and upright before him, as commanded by the hand of Moses. You ask, is it the new covenant, the hand of Moses? From what I can see it is, but again, there may be more. And all the servants and prophets, to love he chooses and hate all he rejects. That is, there's no love your enemy here. To distance oneself from all evil, to hold fast all the works of goodness. Well, I'm going to read this again, but as we go down quickly. To love all the sons of light, and to hate all the sons of darkness. Just like Deuteronomy, the loving and hating, and to perfect your ways. So, like in line 15, nor depart from the laws of his truth, to walk either to the right or to the left. Very strict, you see. Going on into column 2, the cursing starts. We have Paul cursing them, now they curse others. The Levites shall curse, line 4. All the men of the lot of Belial, cursed be you because of your guilty works of evil. May God deliver you up to torment in the hand of all the avenging avengers, and may you be commanded to destruction by the hand of the payers of reward. Cursed be you without mercy, because of the darkness of your works, be damned in the netherworlds. This is cursing the devil here. Of everlasting fire, may God not comfort you when you call out to him. On the contrary, may he raise up his angry countenance to take vengeance upon you. May you enjoy no peace. Then here are the more cursing, and then some blessing comes on. You can read that in column 2. The ways of light and the ways of darkness in column 3. We'll go back over this, the guide still. What I want to show you here is that in column 4, we suddenly get to bathing here. If I can find it here before you leave. It's really, I guess maybe it's column, it's line 20. And God will emerge victorious in the world. Then God will refine with his truth all the works of men and purify himself the sons of men, perfecting all the spirit of unrighteousness within his flesh. And by means of the Holy Spirit, purifying it from evil, he will pour upon him the Spirit of truth like baptismal waters, washing him of all the abominations of lying. That's Holy Spirit baptism put in their language. And then later on it will actually talk about, bathing in rivers and things like that. And we'll get to that next time. But one other thing I want you to look at before we go, and this is column 8. Talking about 12 men in the council and 3 priests. As you know, in early Christianity, there are 12 apostles and 3 inner group that are closer to Jesus. Perfect in all that's revealed in the Torah. And here we get that plantation imagery that we had in the Damascus document. It's obviously written by a different person, but similar ideas. Anyway, line 12, and with the existence of these for a community in Israel, according to these regulations, they shall separate from the midst of the habitation of the men of unrighteousness, to go into the wilderness, to prepare the way of the Lord, as it is written, prepare in the wilderness the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a pathway for your God. Every single person in this room knows that that's how the Gospels begin. So, we are in a parallel literature, if not the same meaning, same what's being used. And just in case you missed that, then in column 9, it says here, let's see, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, 18. He shall comfort them in knowledge and illumine them in the marvelous mysteries and truth, to walk perfectly. 19. Each with his neighbor. Again, loving your neighbor as yourself. All that has been revealed to them. For this is the time of making a way in the wilderness. This, so repeated a second time. So we have the way in the wilderness repeated in the wilderness. And by the way, back here, that the way in the wilderness is also defined back in column 8. So I'll leave you there for next time to look at the community rules. But you see, again, everything in here has a first century parallel. I don't see any parallels in any other century that we've looked at in this class. That's my issue concerning these documents. Good luck.